Good morning, everyone. Okay, well, we are today beginning our third series in our symposium this year on Jewish dimensions of sacred living. And I am really excited and honored to welcome Rabbi Rutenberg, who is a new teacher for us. We had the opportunity to meet and talk last year, or earlier maybe this year. And she is a very exciting and interesting person. Lynn just brought an article that she published in the Chicago Jewish News recently. Danya is an author of several books, including one that I put in there because I thought the title was so great, which is Surprised by God, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Religion. Did you get it, Marilyn? Cool, okay, that sounds really good. And she is also now working with an organization associated with Hillel International, which I'll tell you a little bit about. So I think you're really going to enjoy learning with Rabbi Rutenberg, and let's please just join me in welcoming her.
The question I always get, that's not me on the cover. That's stock photo girl in Photoshop. In terms of the work I'm doing with Hillel International, I've been in the Hillel world for basically my entire life. I worked at Tufts University, and then I was the rabbi at Northwestern last year, and now I'm the educational director for a program called Ask Big Questions out of Northwestern that basically seeks to get students and other people out in the world to be having conversations about the big things that matter. Often we're so focused on, students are focused on their academics, us out there in the world, we're focused on policy or the details of our work, and the questions about, for whom are we responsible? Are we free? What do you choose to ignore? How do you recharge? The questions about being a human being and living a three-dimensional life often get set to the side. And so this is a program that have interns on 19 campuses, paid interns that organize deep conversations about important things. And we partner with organizations like Teach for America and Ashoka and amazing Jewish organizations like Reboot. And those organizations also utilize our methodology and try to get people out there having real conversation. And we think that that's the first step towards making this world a better place and understanding one another. So that's what I do. Let's just start with a question. When you think about the word to honor, what does it mean to honor somebody?
Show respect. Jinx.
What else?
Pay attention to.
Okay.
Look up to him.
What else?
Hold in high esteem.
Hold in high esteem.
Recognize positive traits.
Other things?
Safety needs to be in relationship with that, and to respect your space.
Okay.
Give them space.
Sometimes there is an aspect of public recognition.
Okay. Right, you give people honors, right?
Yeah.
So, do you want to say something else about what you mean by public recognition? Please, I'll have to put my hand right here. Yeah.
I think you also do what you say you're going to do. If you make an appointment with the person, you keep it.
Nice.
Anything personal?
Yeah, we've
Okay,
all had
yes.
that experience of being stood up and not really feeling honored, or at least respected. Pardon? Oh, foul, yes. Okay.
Defer to them and action and conversation.
Okay. And what about, another word, this is the thing where I have to decide which translation I wanna pick. Let's go with to revere. Revere or be in awe of. And then you can, pick whichever one of those that speaks to you. This is the thing about translating words, is that there's always gonna be some nuance that gets missed, so we'll just go back to it. Is it the same? Is it different?
This kind of recognition is, in my opinion, helps to a higher standard.
Okay.
So for example, while I love and respect and honor my friend here, someone, my God, is someone that I revere because that's a higher standard and something to which I aspire,
Okay.
a higher standard.
So is there an action that goes with holding somebody to a higher standard?
To be amazed.
Okay.
I don't know the action, maybe somebody can help me with it, but I think that you understand, it's kind of what Sandy was saying, you're closer to, whereas it's like a second level, when you're in awe, you're just not as close to it, it's like, operating differently, okay, good.
Other thoughts? It's interesting. I didn't have any preconceived ideas about how this is going to go, but you guys all sort of jumped on honor and had a lot of ideas, and I've seen a lot of thinking.
Almost unapproachable.
Mhm. Okay. The handwriting and the spelling.
I don't know if this is going to make sense, but know your place, that you're not in the same place.
Possessing I mentioned characteristics before. Possessing characteristics that are above and beyond my personal level of understanding.
Okay. Somebody's got, if you revere someone, it's one thing to honor them, they're great, they're wonderful, they're mensch. Revere would be like, you are able to do things that I have no idea how you managed to do that. How you managed to write a play that exquisite, or whatever it is, there's something mysterious there.
But sometimes when you're honor someone, I honor them because I've seen what they've done and I would like to emulate that. However, when I'm in awe of someone, that not only do I feel that level might be unattainable, but I don't care.
Okay. Don't even try.
I'm kind of stuck because I keep thinking of honor thy father and thy mother. It doesn't say love your mother.
Correct.
It says honor them.
Uh-huh.
And I certainly can see this show respect. I'm thinking of honor, you go beyond their flaws to show their respect, to show their respect.
Okay. And then you have a comment on the revere or not?
I'm pretty comfortable with what's been said. I think inside kind of ties in. You know, there are certainly well-known figures that we would revere and have flaws.
So you stole my thunder, as those of you who are getting the search sheet know, but in a good way. That means you sort of tapped into to what's going on. This is, we're going to be talking about the parent-child relationship. I'm on the unit of interpersonal relationships, and we're going to start with one of the most primal. Kind of comment.
I was just going to say, I think of being in awe of the person is someone who inspires people. It's a
Okay.
a figure of sorts.
Great. Okay, should we look at some text? Okay. Awesome pink sheet we have. There are two mitzvot related to the child's relationship to the parent in the Torah, and we're going to look at them together and try to figure out what this means on the ground. Yes? Okay, does somebody want to read the first one? In English or in Hebrew or whatever floats your boat.
I'll read it in English.
Okay, go for it.
Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the God your deity has given you.
Okay.
Gives you.
Let's read the second one, and then I want to look at each of them individually a little bit. So we want to read the second one?
A person must be in awe of his mother and his father. You must observe my Sabbaths. I am God, your deity.
Okay, let's work. Now we're going to put that to the side, but you guys are all going to be reading that line while we're done with the first one anyway. So now we've got that out of the way. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which God, your deity, gives you. So first of all, where does this appear?
In Torah.
Ten Commandments, in the Torah, in the Ten Commandments, right? This is that moment of revelation on Sinai, and the thunder and the lightning, and the entire people of Israel get the Big Ten, and this is here. And this appears, right? What is the command? What's being asked here? Or what's being implied? What's being suggested?
There's an implication of a trade-off,
Okay.
and which, in my thinking, is characteristic of the covenant. Covenant being a partnership. So God's suggesting to you human beings to behave in a certain way, and for my part, you will have a long life.
And this is classic Torah stuff, right? If then, and there are all sorts of big theological questions about this, because we all know that even though we can behave in absolutely wonderful ways in our lives, we don't always, not all good people always get cookies, and not all bad people always get, smacked. And our lived reality is more complicated than that, and that doesn't mean, there's a lot here, and there's a lot to unpack. So there's this notion, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long, right? And upon the land which God is going to give you. Which we've already had this whole conversation about God giving you the land, and now it's contingent upon your long life is contingent upon doing this thing. Do we know what it means to honor your father and mother? Is it totally obvious? Okay, I'm seeing some nodding yes and some people saying no. State your case.
I think that honoring your parents is to show respect to them and to honor them as people, not just as your parents.
Okay.
To listen to them, even if you don't follow the advice, at least to listen to what they have to say.
Okay. Yes.
The other thing that comes to mind also is when you, to honor a parent is also to not to do any harm to the name. We shouldn't embarrass them.
Okay, that's a whole other sort of side of this. And then I was hearing a no over here.
I don't think that it's very clear in this particular statement what honor means. And then again, as you can see, it leaves it open to human interpretation.
And here we have the Jewish tradition in a nutshell. That statement right there. And this, you guys, I assume you guys are supposedly regulars, and you have, it says, the Torah says keep Shabbat. It's like, okay, what does that mean? And then we have this entire rabbinic tradition that started with the Mishnah, this oral tradition that eventually got written down around 200 CE, and then developed, fleshed out in the Talmud, which was sort of aggregated over a couple hundred years in ancient Babylonia, finished 500, 600 CE, something like that, where it's like, well, what does it mean to keep Shabbat? Then the Mishnah says here are 39 categories of things you do and don't do on Shabbat. You don't write, you don't erase, you don't cook. And then the Talmud is like, okay, you don't cook, but what happens if I put the food on, Friday before sundown? Then do I get to eat it Saturday lunch or what? And they go through all of these crazy cases to try to figure out what it means actually to keep Shabbat. Right? This is our interpretive tradition. And the big question is, what are we interpreting and how? And that's going to be our question today. So let's look at the second. Okay, a person must be in awe of. This word yirah is a really, really tricky word. It also often gets translated as feared, and I noticed that I actually dissociate. There's one place where I try to swap out other people's translations sometimes. Sometimes it's translated as fear, sometimes it's translated as revere, awe. It's not, ooh, I'm scared a bear is coming. It's that moment when you're like, I'm really tiny, you know. It's more of that. It's that sort of like radical humility when you understand that it ain't all about you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So a person must be in awe of his mother and his father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I'm God. What do you get? What's going on? What do we know? What do we know? What don't we know? What are questions?
Well, if you're hooking it up with that you have to observe the Sabbath, that's very important. So it implies that the first thing must be important too, by association.
Oh, interesting. So this is a very rabbinic way of thinking, right? Trying to sort of keeping Shabbat is a major do, and so then that describes a way the rabbinic tradition actually plays in something around with that connection in other ways.
All at once, I'm thinking of two different things. First of all, the order. It's telling me that I have to honor parents before even thinking about Shabbat. Then I'm reminded who's telling me this.
Right.
But and Shabbat is thought as the utmost. So this is even more utmost than doing the Shabbat. And if you do honor your parents who are relevant or they're good, then that's the road to finding God at the end.
Nice. So you have this, keeping Shabbat is this sort of experience of between human beings and the transcendent, right? Human beings and God. And so this is, in some ways, a path in.
I'm not certain that any of the commandments is more important than the other. They're the 10 Commandments, and they hold equal ground. So if you think that Shabbat is the most important commandment, keep the Shabbat holy. Then if this is right with that, then this is as important. But I'm no scholar, but am I correct that one's not more important than the other?
It depends on how you slice it. I mean, this is one of these what does Judaism say about, and everybody laughs because of course Judaism says a lot of different things about that thing. There were people who would make the case that every mitzvah has equal weight. There were people who would say, listen, wearing shatnez versus not murdering somebody is, it's kind of clear where your priorities should be if you have to pick one. And the rabbinic tradition makes it clear that they also have some ideas about what are the most important. There are three mitzvot that are better to die than to transgress. They do not involve making double cheeseburgers. It's not killing somebody, not committing basically rape or sexual assault of some variety, and not committing idolatry. And not committing idolatry is particularly in public, where if the Romans are coming, the guy has a bayonet to you in the dark alley and says, worship Zeus. Maybe you do it with a sword against the Romans. You maybe in a dark alley would choose to do it to save your life. But as you guys know, saving a life is the most important thing. But if you're in front of the entire community, you don't want to set the precedent that we're all dropping God and worshiping Zeus, and then the tradition says better you should be moderate. So there are a few mitzvot that definitely things you should not transgress. And the complicated how you weight one thing or another is often not clear.
Our rabbis have taught us in our classes that nothing is in the Torah that doesn't have a reason for being there. So one of the things I'm noticing here, that in the first one it says, Avicha and the second one says the opposite, the mother is first.
Great, that's excellent close reading, right? The first one says honor your father and your mother, and the second one says be in awe of your mother and your father. And the rabbis, needless to say, have a field day with trying to figure out what this means.
I have a problem with the whole thing as a generality. I always do is, what if your mother and father are not good people? Why would you honor them?
That is a fantastic question, and we will get there. I will note the title is Parent-Child Relationship Requirements and Limits. And you are not the first person in history, as anybody who's ever read the Bible will know, to have, to ask interesting questions about parenting styles and their implications for the children. Needless to say. Other thoughts, questions, comments? Okay, should we keep going? Yes.
I just have a question unrelated to the topic in particular, but you use the word deity. And I
Yes.
noticed that in your book, too,
Yes.
that you use the word deity. And that was kind of foreign to me in that context. And I was just wondering if that is more conservative or orthodox expression than we use in Reform, because I don't see the word deity in Reform.
So some of that is, it's definitely not something you'll find a lot in the Orthodox world, and a pretty, not mostly the conservative world. For me, it's part of, it's both my feminism and my Bible geekery coming out. Elohim, the best translation for that is deity, right? It is God in El, in both biblical and modern Hebrew, is a god. And so Zeus is an El, right? And so we're talking about deity in the sort of conceptual sense. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is the name of God for us. And so in English we use the word God to talk about that, right? And I personally don't really like, I don't like Lord because it feels like it reinscribes these notions that God is, sort of the dude on the mountain with the thunderbolt and the, temper tantrums. And I think a lot of people have that in their subconscious, and I want to try to unearth it in as many ways as possible. And, that sort of this feminist way of interrogating the sort of hierarchical relationship with God. So I think that our deity is both a more accurate translation and, also helpful for modern people trying to wrap their brains around all of this stuff. So, and plenty of people disagree with me, and they're welcome to. Other thoughts? Okay, should we keep going? Okay, so here we have a Tosefta. As I mentioned before, there's this rabbinic tradition that there was this oral tradition that got written down, right? The main oral tradition that got written down is called the Mishnah, and there's a bunch of stuff that didn't make it into the main canon of this is our sort of super authoritative stuff, but that is also very authoritative, and it's called the Tosefta. Historically, it's about contemporaneous, right? It's an oral tradition that got written down around 150, 200 CE. And it's basically, this is like the stuff that the Talmud uses to move forward into rabbinic law. Does that make sense? Okay, somebody want to read this?
What exactly are the obligations of the son to the father? Giving food and drink, dressing and covering and sheltering, escorting in and out, and washing his face, feet, and hands.
Okay, thoughts, reactions? Is this what you would have expected? Talk to me.
It's something I would expect if you want to identify the obligations of a child to his or her parents. Is something that would happen when they are older and infirm, rather than, if I walked into 50 years old, my mother and started washing her face, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
When she was lying ill,
Right.
and I did that, it was welcomed and.
Great, so there's this sense of that moment when the parent is no longer able to care for him or herself. Right. Other thoughts?
This almost seems backwards to me. When the child is young, you certainly can't do that, and you expect the parent to do that for the child.
Other thoughts? Is this, given everything we've been talking about, is this what you expected the Tosefta to elaborate what it means? Because what is the mitzvah, right? The mitzvot are up here, right? Honor and revere. And they're saying this is what the mitzvah is.
And I'm thinking personally, it was very difficult for my mother to accept that. It was much easier to have a stranger rather than her daughter.
And it's deep, right? These parent-child relationships where anybody who's been a parent, there's that, the intimacy of that work, right? You spend how many years wiping somebody's tush and, taking care of them when they're sick and all of that stuff, and you're used to being in charge. And so it's this, and so there's a lot of really sort of deep stuff around, sort of power and relationship and connection and obligation there.
If I take it apart, so giving them food and drink and shelter, providing shelter, those are basic needs of everybody. But the escorting in and out
Mm-hmm.
and the washing of the hands, feet, and face is intimate. And it really brings you to a different level of relationship than I could wait on somebody, or I can care for somebody. So this is much more caring and intimate. And it does bring to mind older parent and adult children. But I remember going to a class on aging parents that we once gave, and it is our job to see that their needs are met in this way, but it isn't always our job to be the doing of it.
Right.
So that we can find somebody else to do when your parents are living in Florida, for instance.
Absolutely, and this is, the reality of, 2nd century Palestine and the reality of, 2013 in Deerfield are, in many ways, very different realities. And so the assumption, I think the underlying assumption there is the same, right? We need to make sure that your parent, I think everybody sort of, it seems that like, potential, what is the one assumption implicit on giving food and drink?
Well, I think survival. One of the things that's similar to the last comment was, so I think Maslow's hierarchy. So this is a very low level type functioning hierarchy. However, the beauty of it is it maintains relationship and allows for extension of that hierarchy. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in this that's we
This is basic material needs is the starting point, right? We need to make sure that the parent's basic material needs are met. Now, what if the parent can make sure that his or her own basic material needs are met? Right?
Better.
What?
Better.
It's better, right? I don't think that the assumption here is that if, my father is 70 years old, he's still working, he does quite well for himself. If I showed up at his house with a spoon and some gruel and said, here, I think he would probably, give me a kick in the tush, right? He can take care of himself just fine right now. At some point in the future, presumably, there will be a moment when his ability to care for himself in the same way is more complex. And, I don't think this is meant for the parent of a teenager. Unless there are there cases of parents who, even before their old age or their advanced illness, are in a vulnerable situation? Of course. And so this is, I think there's something to the fact that they're not spelling out like, well, after they reach such and such age and, their, 401k, blah, 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 there's room to hold a lot of different situations here.
This, to my eyes, is what happened when the strangers came down the road and Abraham was sitting outside his tent. And he treated those strangers in this pattern.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So the Jewish definition of hospitality is in play here, right? When people are in need, we feed them, and we make sure that they have what to wear, and we make sure that they are clean, and we make sure that if they need help getting where they need to go, that they have that help.
So I want to make it different with you a little bit. So I don't think it's just when a parent is in need. So there is such a thing as giving food and drink to a parent. Most of them.
Absolutely.
So I think what's being said is absolutely true. I think this applies, could apply to others.
Great. So then you're taking this thought about hospitality and expanding it, and I think I like this reading. I've never thought of it this way. That's a fantastic connection. But I like it. Like if you think about your parents in your life are like honored guests. What does that mean in terms of the relationship? Yeah.
When Sandy suggested about the biblical reference, the first thing I thought of when you covered Eric, I thought of Noah. After the ark landed and he was drunk and his son covered his nakedness. So that's what came to mind.
That is a great place to go, and it wouldn't surprise me if, I don't know, because the Toseftas tend to be very succinct, if that was sort of somewhere in the stew of how this got formulated.
Yeah, I read in this, the kind of underlying principle is that the child is obligated to uphold the parent's dignity.
tied on to that, you have to be clear if it's your need or the parent's.
Very interesting.
Oh, yes, so much. And I think that's a good segue into the next source, so let's keep going. So this is from the Talmud. Somebody want to read?
What exactly is revering, and what exactly is honoring?
Fearing, which is revering. It's that year out word again. Okay.
One may not stand in his father's place. One may not sit in his place. One may not contradict his father's words, and he may not offer an opinion in a debate contrary to his father's. Honoring, one must give him food and drink. One must dress him and cover and shelter him, and one must escort him in and out.
No. So does the second part of this look familiar?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and this is how the Talmud works. Like they take older sources, and the Tosefta, as I mentioned, is an earlier, not sort of to the side source. And the later rabbis, and they all knew. Everybody had all this stuff memorized. This was back in the day before you're like, oh, let me Google that. I don't remember. People's brains were capable of holding more information. And so they knew this, and that's, that just, somebody before them, authoritative in the tradition, had already defined what the honoring meant, and so they just sort of plugged that straight in. Okay, we have that one solved. And so then they go into this nuance. So they say that honoring is the sort of material needs that we were talking about, and what is the revering, or the fearing, or the being in awe of? You're out. How are they describing that?
I really dislike this.
You are allowed to. It is your tradition too.
It is against how I would parent, or I want my children to react with me. I want them to have their own opinions. I love debate. I just don't, I don't want them to revolt. That's kind of scary. However, if they get to, that's their own developing selves. If this is Jewish, wait.
Somebody want to make the case for this way of thinking or nuance how we might be thinking about it?
So I have a split decision on this.
Okay.
So the first two things about knowing your place, when we ask his father's place, when we ask his place, I don't think it problems with unless you see this or some other dynamic going on. I think that's a nice thing to offer, not just your father or your mother, but I think in general it's good for both. I have problems with counting the father's words or argument.
Yeah,
I'm
speak
sorry.
up, can't hear
I have problems
you.
with the last two items, contradiction and debate. But again, it could be, respectful debate is all right, not debate is, not a coup d'etat type debate.
And this is the part where I think we need to stretch a little bit and get out of our cultural context and try to imagine what it might be like to be in 5th century Babylonian what the norms were then. So let's go back to some of the things we said about revering, right? There's this holding the other person to a higher standard, feeling that there's sort of this unapproachability, know your place, right? This sort of inspiration. I could throw out a thought about what I think is going on. Yes?
I'm thinking that, I could see this applying to younger children who don't have any knowledge or experience. But when it comes to an older person who's gone to college, let's say, I think that relationship of dialogue is important.
So this is where, Deerfield in 2013 is really different from 5th century Babylonian. There were certain norms about respect and honor, and I would formulate all of these, and if I had to sort of come up with one succinct way of articulating it, I would say don't humiliate your parent in public, right? This is their seat. This is their seat. What are you saying? You're worthy of taking their seat, taking the parent's seat in synagogue or in the Beit Midrash, right, in the study hall. It wasn't just like, come on, man, I'm sitting there. It's like there was a real order and a logic about who was sitting where and what that meant. And there's a sense of like giving the person their due, that this is their seat, right? And you don't stand in their place, you don't sit in their place, not contradicting and not offering an opinion in a debate. It's like, come on, man, whose team are you on? right? That this is not just my reading, and I could be wrong, because the challenge and the beauty and the amazing thing about these sources is that we have a limited amount of information, right? We have it's 6th century voice, and then we have an 11th century commentary, and then we have a 13th century commentary, and everybody's trying to figure out what the older guys meant. How I read this is not that you're getting into a heated debate about whether Martin Scorsese is the greatest director of, alive today, right? It's not that. It's that when there's a public, it would be like, what if Mitt Romney's daughter got up and was like, I'm voting for Obama. Right? You guys are like, it's that. It's that.
Does he have a daughter?
What?
He
I don't
has a
know.
daughter.
He's got a lot of kids.
Sons.
Okay, he's got a lot of sons. So one of Mitt Romney's sons is like out there campaigning for Obama. How does that look? What is that? So what does that say? What kind of statement is that?
Sounds more intelligent than looks.
Political commentary aside, how does that read in our culture? Like, what kind of statement is that, or how would it get interpreted?
In our culture, it would be recognized as an independent thinker. Look at that child who is able to do what he or she wants, despite the way his or her parents have taught. And so, and especially if that person were to agree with me politically, then that person would be even higher up. I'm reminded of my youngest son, whose friends, when he was in middle school, called him for a nickname my mom said. Why? Because every time something would come up, Tony would make a statement, they'd say, how do you know that? And he'd say, my mom said. So that's really a very, very, that's a high honor in a sense. At the same time, as he grew up, we have opinions that don't diverge all the time, and that's okay. I don't think, however, that he would publicly say, my mom said when she spoke it, nor would I say, how dare you. I think that knowing your place is really integral. Even in today's world, there's a certain level of hubris that we do not commit.
And I think that's what we're talking about. I saw when you said you didn't think this was such a big deal, I saw a bunch of people say no. You were shaking your head.
I
Make
think
your
it
case.
shows great disrespect to.
Okay.
To him? Yeah.
Well, respect to his father, and that doesn't mean he can't hold his own opinion. On the other hand, some people don't deserve, some people who may have disrespected their children.
Yeah, we will get into the questionable parenting techniques in a moment. Yeah.
I think it's something that you talked about earlier, whether it's in public or private. And it's one thing to disagree and at home within the confines of the safety of the home. And it's another thing to go out and embarrass or humiliate.
There would be a difference. Would you guys agree that there would be a difference between Mitt Romney's son getting up and saying, I'm going for Obama, and Mitt Romney's son keeping his mouth shut during the entire campaign and doing in the voting booth whatever he wants?
There's a difference.
I think that's what we're talking about, yeah.
So, I mean, it puts the son in a really strange position, because does he simply have to keep his mouth shut? I mean, when all the sons are standing up there on the stage with Dad, does he have to stand up on the stage with Dad too?
What does the text say? Look back at the source.
He does.
I guess.
Are you sure? He may not contradict his father's words, and he may not offer an opinion in a debate contrary to his father's.
But as long as he keeps his mouth shut.
There's something proactive about that, right? That's not, he is required to stand there and be symbolically agreeing with the person, but, there are times and places where you keep your mouth shut. And you, again, our great amazing tradition means that you get to disagree with the text, right? But I think this is what the text is saying.
I'm going to say about the idiom crossing the line. and what the son, the Romney's son, whoever he may be, if he did, I think that would be crossing the line. With my own children, I'm pretty sure that none of this would have applied to our home. But you know, we did have lines that weren't to be present. One of the lines was, and getting back to Ronnie, you know, and when you're going to embarrass your parents in public, that would be a line that you wouldn't want to cross. We used to have a newspaper in Deerfield, we were from Deerfield, and in the section we had the Deerfield blotter. Anybody remember the blotter? And in the blotter, all the children who were caught drinking and were speeding, and they took the mommy's car and they were driving without the license, they were in the blotter. And I used to say to my kids, awful as they may have been at home, and dear Lord, they were, I don't want to see you in the blotter, not to embarrass us. You understand? You never saw the name in the blotter. Thank you. Okay, but the line, that is public. What goes on in your own home, I'm not sure that any of this applies.
I think, you know, maybe the argument can be made that the honoring stuff is more private and intimate, and the fearing stuff is more public.
Just because somebody wrote this thousands of years ago, that was what happened at that place at that time. Things change, obviously, as we're going.
So this is the big question, is there some wisdom here that is relevant to us today? And, you know, your mileage may vary. Thoughts, questions?
I was thinking, this is mundane, but when you were talking about taking the father's place and so on, we were in a group, and one person always sat in the host chair, and someone said it drove her crazy that he just sat in what had always been the host chair, and that was usurping the right of the host.
There's this thing about these subtle dynamics about power and honor and respect. They do exist in our culture, and they potentially have different weight and meaning, and there may be things that feel heavier or lighter here versus that then whatever. But I think this is what they're talking about. It's don't humiliate your parent in public, basically, and it's not even don't go out and do something stupid and then everybody knows that you're stupid and you know it makes me look bad, right? This is don't get on record in the paper saying that you think your parent is an idiot when they're running for public office, right?
Yeah, this is even more mundane. My older brother in his house has his seat, and no one sits in his seat. You don't take his place. And no one does. I mean, they respect that.
What about with Abraham? I thought argued with God about Sodom and Gomorrah. Here he's argued with God, you know, and God said, you know, okay, let's have this move. But I think he did it respectfully. He didn't say, hey, God, you're an idiot, you should do this. You know?
And it was there was a lot of respect in the way that conversation was carried forth. And my little comment about Chicago Jewish News this week is, I just noticed for the first time that Abraham is totally bold in talking, if you want to know about parenting styles, totally bold in standing up to God in Sodom and Gomorrah. And then in the exact same parsha, you know, several verses later, he rolls over and just does whatever he's told in terms of kicking out one son and then binding up the other one to kill him, right? He's totally brave when it comes to other strangers. And then so there's, we'll get into the bad parenting in a moment. But this was Abraham and God. This was a private conversation, right? This was not Abraham saying in front of everybody, you guys, God is totally unjust and God is doing this terrible thing, right? They were partners negotiating on a project. But there was this sense that they were on the same team and just working out the terms. If that makes sense.
When you talk about honoring and respect, it also brings up some things that we have had in discussion, and my friends and I also, how the world is different culturally in terms of respecting not just elders, but those in position. When I was in school, if my teacher did anything, the teacher was God. It wasn't the same when my children were in school. I was able to come in and speak on their behalf without this unquavering position that the teacher must know best. The same with doctors. The same with all those in authority. I think our notion of just becoming beneath others is uncomfortable. And we've even transferred that to our children, that they also have the right to meet us face to face.
So that's a great segue to the next text. So let's keep going. So this is from the Mishnah, which, as I mentioned, is this ancient source, ancient oral tradition. Somebody please take it. It's the last source on the bottom.
If a man's own lost article and his father's are to be attended to, his own has the precedence. His own lost article and his teacher's, his own has the precedence. His father's lost article and his teacher's has the precedence. Because his father brought him into this world, that his teacher who has taught him knowledge has brought him thereby into the world to come. If, however, his father is an educated man, he has the precedence. If his father and his teacher were each carrying his burden, he shall assist his teacher first in helping him take off his burden, and therefore assist his father. If his father and his teacher were taken into captivity, he shall ransom his teacher first and then his father. If, however, his father is an educated man, he shall ransom his father first and then his teacher.
I knew you guys would have thoughts and responses to this text. Okay, first, does somebody want to summarize it for me in a sentence or two? What's the gist here?
But, all I could think of is that this is just ridiculous. When you're on a plane and it says, put your mask on first and then your children. Which child do you pick first?
I was once on a plane with the captain. They sort of, put on, your mask and your child mask second. If, however, you have two children, put on the mask first of the child with the greatest earning potential. Exact same response on the plane, right? Anyway, but what is this text saying? Like, this text says, give me a sentence or two.
Revere education.
Okay. What else? Even more basic, like, what are the layers of priority here that it's articulated?
Teachers are more important than parents.
And who's more important? Like, if you have a lost object and your parent, or you have a lost object and your teacher, who gets taken care of first?
Your own needs.
You, right? Step one, take care of yourself, right? Put on your own mask. And then step two, there's the sense of your teacher before your father, because why?
But if the father was the teacher with the knowledge,
Right.
it's the person that has the education and the knowledge that sees the present.
Right. But what is the language that we're using? Because I don't think we're just talking about education. Your father brings you into, and your teacher brings you into. Right. This is not just, oh, it's really great that I went to college, right? There are metaphysical things at stake here, and I think it's an important distinction that we're not just talking about learning in the algebra sense, and I think we need to have that nuance in the room.
Yeah. Wisdom, isn't it? Wisdom.
Wisdom and the eternal life, right? This is not when they say world to come; they were being literal, right? This is part of the rabbinic worldview, the rabbinic belief system, and it may or may not be your worldview, your belief system. But there's a sense of if you do mitzvot in the proper way, there are sort of eternal consequences for that, and they were dead serious. So they were concerned about the fate of your soul.
The more valuable person.
The catch here is that there are many times that a common laborer has what they call street smarts. And you learn more from that common person who never went to school, possibly than a person who did, ethically.
So then again, this is the nuance, right? This is not about this is about ethics. This is about how to be a person. This is about how to serve God, right? This is about how to bring holiness into the world. This isn't just about like whether or not your college professor is going to be the person to help you figure out how to negotiate for your first job, right? This is not, we're not talking about secular wisdom here. And I think we need to sort of keep remembering that. Anybody, I'm going to make some assumptions about how people are reading this text, but tell me, could somebody want to make their argument for this text, against this text? Like, what's the wisdom here? What are the problems? Have at it.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, this is of a particular time that has a hint of what we could value in today's world. As a teacher, I would love it. But I think that when we say, I don't like this, I don't like what it says here, that doesn't do justice or honor to those who put these ideas to parchment or stellar, whatever they use. And so if we're talking about honoring, we have to honor this as much as, respect this, as much as we would the Constitution of the United States, which did not include women in having the right to vote. And this, like the Constitution, is mandatory, so we know that. But we have to respect the time, the thinking that went into this. This is, it's a bunch of people sitting around and hashing things out, which I always hold them, I wish I were there sometime. But seriously, we have to look at a lot of this in its context and take from it what is relevant to us.
One and then two.
So for me, this is a problematic construction
Okay.
at best. The first part of it involves three parties: self, father, teacher, and the priorities are clear. And what I would call a problem, something's lost. And the construction at that point on, the self is removed. That's between the father and the teacher, and with escalating severity, I would say, of the problem. So I think there's a different message in each of those two pieces of the construction. So it's not all three parties are being compared in every situation of the priorities are. In the first situation, something lost, the three parties are being compared. But in the second, the third, and fourth, there's a fourth situation. It's the teacher and the father that are being compared, not the individual. So I would say it's written by a teacher with a teacher's bias. And I would say from a logical construction, it's not quite precise.
Okay, that is a great statement. This is definitely written by teachers with teachers' biases. It is in some ways totally self-evident, but also I would just want to sort of name explicitly, this is also, all of these texts are written for men, by men, about men, right? Even though there are texts that talk about honor your father and mother versus honor your mother and father, but I wanted to get at different kinds of points, so I didn't bring them, but, you know, questions of, it's all he, him, father, and I think in the 21st century we can read women back into these texts without too much trouble, but I just want to sort of name that that's there.
As I'm reading these, I tend to have trouble with the fact, I think parents are absolving themselves of some of the responsibility of being a role model. And certainly, and it can apply, I mean, I think it's really applicable to today, that we are not teaching our children about the respect of the teacher. And there, ergo, as you're teaching respect for the teacher, you're also teaching respect for you, the parent.
Great. So there's these layers, and you know, and the text is very clear. If the parent has the capabilities to be the teacher, So one more comment, and then I'm going to ask a question.
Instead of the word teacher, I like the word knowledge. One reason why Jews have gotten ahead is we want our children to go to college, get a decent job, and make themselves a better life. So when I was growing up, whatever the teacher said, most of 98% of the time was, hey, she knows better than me, you know.
Right, and there's this sort of hierarchy that we've been alluding to. So, question, does this, yes or no, does this change your assumptions about how we're thinking about honor and or revere your parent? No, yes, no, yes? I mean, there isn't, right, there isn't this sort of like, there are limits, right? you've lost a thing, your teacher's lost a thing, and your dad's lost a thing, and dad's sort of bottom of the list, right? We find that this puts a certain kind of a boundary on the nature of this relationship.
I think it goes against human nature. I think a child will always be a parent. I think children, no matter how bad their parent is, always want them to love them, want to get their respect, and I think they'll always do the one step beyond in order to get there.
So I want to now move into the complicated parent situations, right? First, quick question, show of hands. How many people think that so far the commitment to honor and or revere your parents involves being required to love them? Being required to love them. It's not there, right? Judaism typically does not command you to feel stuff. It commands you to do stuff. And what you think about it, as you're caring for your aging infant parent is kind of your business. But this is we are a tradition of actions. Even the commandment to be happy on Sukkot is actually act joyfully. And how you act joyfully is you go to the feast and do this and do that and all these other things. It's very clear in the context of the commandment that you bring in other people and you have a big party and you eat really delicious food, whatever. You tithe. It doesn't say feel great. It says go do things that are joyful. And, maybe you'll be feeling it, maybe you won't. But there is no commandment to love. Not in this way. There's one more comment and then let's move forward.
We're just looking at the Hebrew and it doesn't say teacher does it, it says Hachema.
Chacham,
Wise
right,
person, and Chacham, and that's powerful, because that's, my teachers, some of them were, as yours, were foolish or silly, but we didn't think them as being wise, so here.
Yeah, again, we are not talking about your third grade teacher or your high school gym teacher or any of that. This is not secular knowledge. This is your rabbi, right? I, am pretty far along in Jewish whatever, and I have been to rabbinical school. I have been around the Jewish world, there and back and around. There's one person that I call my rabbi. He unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, so this is sort of a past tense. But I've had one rabbi. I've had a number of teachers, right? I've had a number of people who have been powerful and taught me Talmud, taught me spirituality, taught me depth and meaning and ethics and how to be a person in the world. I've had one rabbi. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the idiot that got stuck teaching you, high school chemistry at all. Okay, I want to look at I'm going to start looking at the second two sources on this sheet, and then at the end we'll go up. I'm just sort of changing my mind about the order we want to do this. We'll do the English one at the end. So this next source, the one in the middle on the back page, yes, is from the Torah, which is a very early legal compendium. So this is somebody the Torah took, went through the Talmud and looked at all of the many layers of conversations of the Talmud. He's writing around 1100, and tried to crystallize and make it even clearer, because the Talmud has lots of debates back and forth. Of 5,000 debates in the Talmud, 50 are resolved on the page, right? Like one person's like it's kosher, somebody's like it's not kosher, your argument is wrong, no you're wrong, no you're an idiot, here's one, your argument doesn't make any sense, and this is the tradition of our people. But there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of open-endedness in the Talmud, which is powerful, and I think there's a lot of space for us as modern people to sort of hold multiplicity of voices in that way. But there's also the question of great, so what's the answer? Is it kosher or is it not? What do we do? And so the Torah was the first guy to go through and try to help concretize it for people sort of on the street. Does that make sense? Okay, so somebody want to read this Rabbeinu Yitzchak? In the English, go, bring it.
It's in the middle, right?
Yep.
Revenue Yitzchak started the ruling in light of the law that children don't have to honor their parents at the children's expense. Clearly, therefore, if the father threw the son's wallet, the son can stop him. The ruling is that when the father throws out his own wallet, the son can't rebuke him in order to stop him, even though in the future the son will inherit from him. Rabbi Meir Halevi wrote that in the case of the son's wallet, he may rebuke his father only before he throws it into the sea, thus he can prevent him from throwing it. However, after the father throws it, the son may not rebuke him because he can't undo what's in the past. The son's silence, therefore, is a form of honor which does not involve financial loss, and thus he is obligated to do it. This means only that the son is forbidden to rebuke his father. He is permitted, however, to sue the father in court to recover his money.
And thus, whole tradition of litigation.
Welcome to the Jewish people. Okay, somebody want to summarize this text in a sentence or two? Again, just like basically, like, what does it say? What's the bottom line here? What are the takeaways?
Fancy one, or what kind of wallet? Want a fancy one?
Oh, for Pete's sake, come on. Give me a summary, yeah.
Well, I'm seeing briefly that you may not dishonor your father, but if your father does something directed against you and your well-being, you do have recourse.
Correct. Right? Here's the limits. If your father is about to do something to harm himself, there are two opinions. One is, like, just whatever, you know, go off and do it. My need to revere you and to honor you means that I'm gonna not rebuke you. And then there are other people who say, well, if you can stop him from harming himself, that's one thing, like you should do that, but once the thing is done, berating them, that's really not love and respect. Love is not part of this, not honor, it's not revering, it's not any of this stuff, right? But if your father wants to harm you, where are we? Either before the fact or after the fact. What does this text say?
Before that, you can protect yourself.
You have the right to protect yourself. What else?
The thing that struck me strange is that you can't rebuke him, even though in the future you'll inherit from him. So it's sort of in the future you might be harmed, but you can't do anything to protect your interests now.
Correct. And that is a nuance. But frankly, if your father had, a huge chunk of money, and instead of spending it on your inheritance, decided to spend it on a Ferrari, right? What's the answer? Look, it's his money. You know, at some point, it theoretically could be your money, but he could decide that, you know, he's gonna, for whatever reason, write you out of the will, or give all the money to the other sibling that he likes better, or give it all to this, you know, woman he met while he was on vacation. I mean, you know, or donate it all to charity, right? The fact that it could theoretically be your money in some future situation does not guarantee it as your money. So here, if he wants to do with it what he wants, okay. But what about if your father wants to harm you? First, you have the right to protect yourself, and then if he has already gone and harmed you, what's the bottom line? There you have recourse, right? You don't have to say, honoring my parent means that I'm taking abuse, right? That means that I'm taking somebody treating me in a way that is not okay, legally or ethically. Yes? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, but before we said that you shouldn't do anything to embarrass or hurt your parent in public, and certainly going to sue them is very public.
Somebody want to address that distinction? What's the difference?
The action is against you as opposed against, so therefore you do have the recourse.
The action is against you.
Yeah. So you can, you know, stand up for your rights or however you want it.
You get to stand up for your rights.
Sort of suggests that it takes it out of the personal disagreement and puts it in another place.
What do you mean?
Well, in our society, it would be a civil action, but it's not a personal rebuke. It's not a one-on-one in the sense that you're discussing this with your father, rebuking him directly. You're doing it indirectly.
This is not, Dad, you stupid idiot, you are the worst person in the entire world. This is, justice needs to be served. He's not suing his father to punish him, he's suing his father to get his money back, right? He's suing his father to right the wrong. And, in some cases, you could extend this to say that if the father has been guilty of a real crime, and, there is a concept of justice and of righting wrongs and fixing balances. If this is not, your father is campaigning for office and you get up and you say, my father is a meanie, stupid head, right? It's not that. This is, I have a right to my own personhood and I get to have my mask inflated, and just because you don't get to take it, one and then two, and then three.
It's also true, I think, that there's an intermediary here. You're not the one talking to your father. Presumably there's a lawyer talking to your father. And that kind of takes it one step away from rebuking him in public, I think.
Well, in fact, it's not that. Right.
So my question for you is, I think this makes a lot of sense. It requires a child of a certain age who's able to understand justice and procedure. But I think my personal view is a lot of damage is done to children before that age. I think that is impressive.
Correct. We will get there a little bit more in a moment.
This is a matter of communication. If the child would at least say to the father, I disapprove of the action of your throwing the wall, and they have a discussion, father says, no, for whatever reason he feels it's important, at least the son can sort of understand it. But when you're not saying anything, then it makes it even worse. We have 3 children, and 2 of them really don't need any of our money, and the third really could use it when we pass away. And I said, we're going to give the third one a little bit more, but I discussed it with the children. And they said, no, we each want our third. So rather than there being an argument when we die, we've avoided a bad blood between our 3 kids. So I thought I did something pretty good. I would have liked it the other way, but I think it's eventually going to be their money.
But we have these 2 sources. One says, don't rebuke your father, it's his money, he can do what he wants. And somebody else says, listen, if he's about to do something stupid, you do have a space to come forward and say something before it happens.
It seems to me that the father in the last case is doing something that isn't just against the son, but there's a societal value or a sense of justice about it, and therefore the son has the right to, get some redress from that.
Right, but we live in a society where there are boundaries and limits, and those boundaries and limits do not stop existing because it's a parent-child relationship, is basically what this is saying, in either direction. And, as crucial as it is to honor and revere parents, our sources are clear that this is not limitless. And I know there are plenty of Jewish parents, of abusive Jewish parents through history who have said, well, you're required to honor me, so, roll over and take it. And that's not what our tradition says, right? Our tradition says if your last object is lost, you got to take care of yourself. If your parent is coming into your space and trying to harm you, you have a right to defend yourself and you have a right to redress. Right? This is not this sort of limitless concept. There are important active values and important steps you have to take, and it's not infinite. Okay, should we move on to the next source? So let's do the bottom one. This is the Shulchan Aruch, which is this is now we're 16th century land of Israel, and this is these days still considered the principal authoritative law code in our tradition. The Torah did his thing, and then slightly after that, Maimonides compiled the Mishnah Torah, which is a work of elegance, sort of beyond anything, really. And for various reasons, and the Shulchan Aruch was 16th century, and is just, this is when if you're in a fight, if 2 people who are observant in Jewish law are having a disagreement about what to do, if there's the question about what to do, the first thing you do is you open up the Shulchan Aruch. Can pregnant women fast on Yom Kippur? Like, you open up the Shulchan Aruch, that's your starting point. today. And, then you go from there, on a contemporary question, they're often bring in later voices, but that's where you start. So, somebody want to read this?
A father commanded his son not to talk with someone and not to forgive him until a specific date. The son wants to restore the friendship immediately if it weren't for his father's edict. He need not listen to his edict. If a student wants to study Torah in a different city where he is confident he will succeed in his studies due to a particular teacher there, and his father protests because he fears the physical threat of the non-Jews in that city.
Remember, different time and different era, different preconceived notions. Continue.
The son need not listen to his father in this situation.
So the Ramah is the Shulchan Aruch. Joseph Caro is a Sephardi commentator living in the land of Israel. Slightly after that, the Ramah is an Ashkenazi commentator who, if you open up the Shulchan Aruch, you'll see in the one type there's Caro's voice, and then you'll see in a slightly different, smaller and slightly different type, like kind of what is it? Italics. Yeah, it's like a different font and different, like in italics, whatever. You see this other voice, and often he will add something, or he'll say, actually, in Germany we do it differently, or here's our custom that's sort of related but a little different, and it's great because this is again the multiplicity of voices in our tradition. Okay, so what does the Ramah say?
If the father protests the son's decision to marry a particular woman that the son has chosen, the son need not listen to the father.
Okay. Sorry. So somebody want to summarize this for me in a sentence? What is he saying, and then what do you think about it?
I'm more troubled by what you're supposed to listen to the father about, because all these are very important.
So before we even get there, what does the source say? In a sentence.
What the father wants.
There are a lot of places in our tradition, right, that honoring and revering doesn't mean necessarily you get to decide what happens for me in my life. Right? That if I know where I need best to go learn, or presumably what trade or whatever, I get to follow that. If there's somebody that I love that my parents aren't into, who decides? You do. Right? And this is, and they're living in an era where arranged marriages were very much, the thing. And still, this is a very, very strong statement. If you're not feeling it, it's your life. And you should honor, you should revere, but that doesn't mean you give over all authority. Yeah.
Now, my question is, certainly within the Jewish community, I can understand that. However, when a son would marry a non-Jewish girl, and then the family would sit Shiva, they weren't certainly abiding by this.
So I think the Ramah was assuming that the daughter that the person wanted to marry is Jewish. And then this is a big, very interesting question about how and whether we would read it differently in the 21st century, and whether that is something, there are people who could say, well, so I'm going to extend the argument, if the parent wants the child to be in a heterosexual relationship and the child is like, that's not happening, here's who I'm choosing, is it reasonable and fair to extend this line of thinking in that direction? I can see the arguments pro and con for that. And somebody who is in the Orthodox community would say, listen, they're talking about Jews. It's very clear that Ramah is not talking about non-Jews, so that's not even on the table. And somebody in sort of more progressive, more liberal segments of Judaism might say, no, actually, let's take this text and think about how it applies today, and maybe we want to put that on the table. I offer all options for all Jews, and I'm not telling anybody how they have to interpret this.
In arranged marriages, the male is the dominant force. Am I correct in understanding this, even back then, or not?
I don't think I think socio-cultural gender norms, Jewish law, and the institution of arranged marriage, there's all sorts of complicated overlaps and how things worked in a certain place in history and how things absolutely have to work. And I think it's a complicated, multi-layered thing that's going to be hard to unpack in a sentence or two. So I sort of don't want to touch it because that's a whole other hour and a half, really. Other thoughts, comments? So for folks, there were a few folks who were talking about, who had earlier raised the question about like an abusive parent. How do these two sources speak to that to you? They're not talking about an abusive situation explicitly. How do you think this addresses this
The
question?
child's entitled to their personhood. I mean, to who they want to be, who they are.
Yeah, the honoring and revering does not require the abnegation of yourself. Straight up. Even in much more mundane situations, like where do I want to go study? Right? Certainly not in a situation where someone's trying to actually take away your personhood.
So is that saying you don't have to follow the commandment?
Let's read the last source. Okay, this is Joseph Telushkin, who's an Orthodox rabbi who writes a lot. If you're interested in great sort of books on Jewish ethics or introductions to Jewish living or anything, he's got all of his books are about this thick and weigh about 5,000 pounds, and they're good. So this is him, and it's totally English. Somebody want to take it? Why don't you read it? Since this is your question.
The surprising feature of the fifth commandment is its insistence that we owe our parents honor while saying nothing about loving them. It is not as if the Torah is reluctant to command love. Love your neighbor as yourself. And you shall love the Lord your God. You shall love the stranger. Why then are we not commanded to love our parents? One possibility is that the parents are included in the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself, since they too are neighbors. You are commanded to love them. But I think the real reason is that the Torah realized that it is harder to command love in a relationship as intimate as that between children and parents. Either the love is present or it isn't. In addition, many children, much as they might love their parent most of the time, go through periods of estrangement from them. Thus, what the Torah is offering us is the guidance for behavior, and even during those periods when we might not be feeling loving toward our parents. Even at those times, we feel our parents have not been fair to us, or even when we have seen them doing something we regard as wrong, we are still obliged to honor them. However, in instances of parents who have physically or sexually abused their children, I believe that children do not owe the parents respect or anything else for that matter.
Can I answer your question? No. Okay.
So number one, why is it parenthetical? Number two, there's a whole area of emotional intimacy, which you talked about. Trying to deprive somebody of personal, which is not physical, it doesn't have to be physical or sexual. I think this is a lack of statement of the tradition, but I'm not sure this is, I'm not sure from my perspective.
Other thoughts? I have a comment or a spot, but I want to bring in other voices.
There's something going on that came from Facebook that was, viral, and saying, the vote like if you were spanked by your parents and you were still okay. And it depends on the receiver. Some people are not okay. If something vital happened, but others can still go on and still think, oh, I know they're doing, this is what they do, this is what parents do, and I accept it. I think that this is such a personal position to take. So I still think that no matter what behavior I observe in my parents, I still make sure that their needs are met. I have to honor them they gave me life. I am the direct descendant. I owe them the right to make sure that they're cared for in basic ways. It doesn't say I have to love them.
Other thoughts? Agree, disagree? Oh, come on, you folks have opinions on this.
Well, I think some are so egregious that it's very hard to demand that the child honor the parent, even honor the parents. And for their own self-protection, they have to withdraw. And probably not overtly be abusive, but certainly withdraw the connection.
Wait, so who is not overly being, the child is not overly being abusive about the
Yes.
connection?
Yeah.
Because there is already
Yeah.
deep dysfunction
Yes.
in the relationship. Yeah.
You know, I think it's great if you're angry at your parent and you know that they were less than perfect and you can still go and care for them. That's to your credit. But I think some are probably so over the top that you can't do it. You have to self-protection. And I think Lucian really has insight into bringing the old into the modern era.
Your thoughts?
I don't know. Around here, and I'm thinking most of us have children, and most of us we all had parents. My opinion is that whether they revered me or honored me, I don't care about any of that stuff. Beyond everything, above and beyond all of this stuff that we're talking about, I would want them to love me. Hope they love me.
So here's the thing in terms of both of your comments. Jewish law is a framework of actions, and it tries to be as realistic and flexible, right? We've seen all of these situations that sort of complicate this idea that this is how you're supposed to act, right? You need to have a sense of autonomy. You have a right to defend yourself and all of that, right? Love, I think, as Talishkin is getting to, I actually disagree with him that you know, love your neighbor as yourself is a feeling. I think that is talking about an action, and that's a whole other case, a whole other hour and a half to make that case. But certainly, I mean, what he's pointing to is that it's very, very, very difficult to legislate parental children's love towards their parents. Because, as he notes, it's really complicated. And so we have these actions that you take, right? You make sure that their material needs are met. You don't humiliate them in public, that sort of thing, right? That's pretty basic. Most people can handle it, whatever you're feeling. I absolutely 1,000% acknowledge that there are kinds of emotional abuse that are absolutely disruptive to a person's self-image. There's no question. My guess about why Talishkin didn't touch it, possibly he doesn't agree with me on this, or possibly, whatever. Maybe he thinks emotional abuse isn't so bad. My guess is the reason that he didn't want to touch it in, this one parenthetical statement he's making a bigger point. This isn't really what this essay is about. He wanted to at least acknowledge that the obligation to respect parents and honor them and revere them is basically annulled if the parents have broken the child. It's a very hard question. How do you define emotional abuse? Physical abuse and sexual abuse are pretty concrete. Emotional abuse is much more complex, and there's a much more complex gradient scale that isn't to minimize the damage. But from a legislative standpoint, it gets a lot harder to say, if your parent shouted once, you don't have to, you know what I mean? Like, if your parent spanked you, and it was in this cultural thing, and this was what happened afterwards, versus if your parents spanked you and you lived in fear of them. You know what I mean? It just gets much, much more fraught to try to figure out how you articulate that in a legal framework. And this is a legal framework. Do I personally think that emotional abuse should be on this list of things that, potentially can nullify the obligation to honor your parents? Yes. Am I comfortable defining exactly what that framework is? No. Is it possible to try to say, I think there are a lot of people for whose solution is like if their parent has been emotionally or physically or sexually abusive, even if they don't have to, or even if they feel that they do, or whatever, that there's a way that I am not coming to their house, feeding them the gruel and washing them. I am, as we sort of talked about earlier, going to choose to use some of my resources to make sure that that parent is cared for. But I also think that there is a certain place where parents sort of lose their right to, the part of bringing you into this world, I think, means that they're nurturing you and protecting you and training you. This is the work of parenting. Sarah Reddick is this fantastic philosopher on this stuff, and this is three kinds of ways that we do this work. We nurture, we protect, and we train. Right? Nurturing is helping a child's inner light be cared for and sustained, and that you don't sort of crush their natural exquisiteness. Protection is pretty straightforward, right? Emotional, physical, whatever, you have to kind of get them to adulthood. And that's small children, and so the suicidal tendencies are strong with them. That's terrible. You know, there's basic physical protection, but there's also all sorts of other kinds of protection that's part of this nurture. And we have to protect them, we have to nurture them and encourage the light to grow and grow and grow. And training is like, you know, this is how we hold a fork, this is how we say the Shema, this is how we respond to a bully, right? There are ways that we think about being in the world, and we want to have our child be in the stream of that. And I believe personally, and this is a homiletic statement, not a legal statement, that if a parent does not do the work of nurturance, protection, and training, an abusive parent is not nurturing, is not protecting, and, you know, maybe training you a little too harshly in certain directions, right? You know, what happens if you don't hold the fork right? That they're not holding up their side of the covenant. And this is a covenantal relationship, right? This is, you know, as we sort of talked about at the beginning, it's a covenantal relationship between us and God, but it's also a covenantal relationship between parents and children. And so both parties need to uphold their sides of the covenant for this to work. And, you know, in its most challenging manifestations, the obligations, I think, get shifted around some. And at its best, the parents who have been doing the work of protection and nurturance and training then know that their children are going to protect them and nurture them when they need it. And, you know, to also honor their light and also help them to be who they need to be in the world. And, you know, I think there's something really beautiful about that. We're just about time. Thoughts? Yeah?
So, on a personal note, this I fit in, I just joined you, so forgive me if this is being redundant. My parents were wonderful people, but they were not perfect parents. So, what I began to do is I've always loved them and I've always honored them. The things that they did that they didn't like, and I didn't have terrible things, but they certainly didn't like them. I gave my parents permission, with love, after and when they were in this dimension, yes, I gave them permission to give back the qualities they had that I thought were not good or not healthy for me or marginally destructive. I gave them permission to give it back to the person who gave it to them.
Nice.
In so doing, I protected myself because I don't got it anymore. I gave it back. And because I love them, even if they annoyed me, and indeed they did, they can give it back to whoever, you can give it back to my grandmother, and they can go back to Russia, and I can pass it down the line. So I protected me and still gave it back as well.
That's really, really powerful. And I think, you know, not every, I mean, thank you. Thank you for that. It's actually very inspirational. You know, and I think if a parent-child relationship has space for it, I think that can be a really, really powerful, transformative thing to do. And some parent-child relationships have that space and some don't. And, you know, part of what our sources say is connect with honor, connect with respect, connect with reverence, and take care of yourself, whatever that means. So I want to bless you all that you have a wonderful Tuesday and a wonderful week. And we will be back here next week, same bat time, same bat channel. And we're going to talk a little bit more about slightly more intimate relationships. So, thank you.